Mhm.
Hello, this is John Majori with Majori on Bowie.com. Thank you for joining me today. If you have a chance, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it, please hit like and subscribe, and you will get a weekly discussion about something having to do with David Bowie. And while you're at it, visit the blog, MajoriOnBowie.com, where I update the content daily. You'll get something new every single day, almost all of which has to do with David Bowie. Today, I am delighted to be joined again by Jordan Rothacker, a writer from Athens, Georgia, where we're going to continue our discussion about his novel, The Death of the Cyborg Oracle. And I do think that this discussion will hold up as a standalone, but if you missed the first part and you're interested, it's right there on the YouTube page. It's also there on the blog. Jordan's essays, reviews, interviews, poetry, and fiction have appeared in a range of publications, including Guernica, The Believer, and The Literary Hub. And he serves as the book's editor at Statement of Record. As I mentioned, the focus of our discussion today will be on his novel, The Death of the Cyborg Oracle, the cover art of which is behind me. And the book itself is not directly about David Bowie, but Bowie's influence appears on every page. And I'm also going to give a plug to Jordan's upcoming book, The Shrieking of Nothing, which is a sequel. As we're having this conversation today, it has not yet been released, but I am going to invite Jordan to come back after it has been released. I've had a chance to read it because I found the first book so fascinating. So, Jordan, thank you for joining me again today.
Hi, John. Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to keep on talking.
Yeah, and just for the audience, I just want to show that the shirt I'm wearing today actually is relevant because it's a David Bowie shirt, and you're not going to see the logo for most of the interview. But much like the book, Bowie's presence is with us. So, so we left off and we started getting into the religious implications of the book, and I thought I would, at the beginning of the last discussion, I asked you to tell us what the book is about. And you asked me what I think the book is about. And just especially for people who are joining us for the first time, I'm going to answer that question and tell me where I got it wrong. But it's a murder mystery, right? The title itself is very accurate because the story revolves around the death of an oracle who is a cyborg. But the book manages to pack in so much more that it actually reminded me, not stylistically, but in some respects, it reminded me of one of my very favorite books, which is The Name of the Rose by Alberto Eco, which is also a murder mystery, where the solution to the mystery is not the main point of the book. And I felt that way with this book as well. There is, if you're interested, you will find, the whodunit is solved. But I didn't feel like that was the main point. The book is about religion. It's about many themes that David Bowie covers in his music. And to me, what I thought was the keystone theme was the relationship between the individual and the larger society. But there are many other themes ranging from gender ambiguity to human sexuality to diversity. I'll tell you something else that occurred to me. A lot of fans' favorite Bowie song or on their top 10 list is Rock and Roll Suicide. And the lyric that jumps out to a lot of people is "You're not alone." But that is the only song that I could think of in Bowie's repertoire that really delivers that message. And just for me, the context is he's saying you're not alone in a context of 400 other songs that celebrate or at least acknowledge diversity. And I really see that as coming through in this book too, where you're not alone, but everybody's different, genuinely different. And I'm doing too much talking, but I'm leading up to one of the manifestations of that difference in the book is everybody worships their own deity. And some of those deities come from history or religions that in our world are now dead religions. Some of them come from fiction. But to me, that is a manifestation of human diversity. So before I get into my specific questions, how wrong am I?
No, I mean, like that's, I mean, it is very much like a in praise of difference of the range of human experience. I mean, if I mean, I wish I can't write a book to pack the whole world into, but you know,
Yeah,
I'm trying. I mean, I'm leaving that for Joyce Carol Oates and William T. Vollmann, you know, just you know, the quantity and wonderful work that they're doing. But yeah, and this is a relatively short book, but you know, there's a second one. You know, we'll see how much more I crank out about this world. But it's themes I've worked on before. I mean, that kind of actually was the without getting too much into it. One of the initial ideas of this book was I'm just gonna write a book of my greatest like quick passions. You know,
yeah,
it was meant to be a book that I could just kind of bang out quick because it's all the stuff that I don't have to really stop for research. It's all the stuff I care about, love the most, just naturally, just in my brain. I got the whole idea of the book, you know, kind of part and parcel one evening. Um, the next day, literally, it wasn't even an email. I wrote a Facebook message, like messenger, to my publisher who had done one of my books before this at Spaceboy Books, wonderful people, and I said, "Hey, at the end of this summer." And it was a hell of a summer. This was summer of 2019. Said if at the end of this summer you've got a manuscript that just shows up in your inbox and it's this, and I described the book itself and has lines like this, and I gave a couple lines from it. You know, you know, would you be interested in that? And the response was amazing. He said, "I'll just send you a contract right now. I trust you. You know, do
yeah.
it. I want that book." And so it took me a year. It didn't take me 2 months. And somehow, I mean, but I had a lot going on. I just had a child born. You know, my wife bore our second child that the May that I had the idea for this book.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So there was a lot going on. I mean, it was a the beginning of 2019 was wild. My father died in like the first second week of January. I taught 7 classes over 4 months at 3 different colleges. We had just bought a new house. I had a book come out. First collection of short stories came out in March. Second child born in May. Lot going, and like, but like doing all of that just gets my mind going. And so I'd been teaching I've been teaching a world literature class, and I was teaching a creative writing class at one college. And so this book just kind of came out of, like, you know, I mentioned in the last, you know, last interview we did, you know, some of the influences, but I'd just been teaching, you know, you know, from, you know, ancient Egyptian, you know, poems up to like Dante. And so, and in a college that was on the quarter system, so kind of compressing that into like 2 months, and teaching creative writing at that college at the same time while teaching at 2 other schools. It was a lot going on. But so like early May, you know, I had this, you know, this vision one night of this whole entire, you know, situation of the world and Thinkowitz and these characters, and you know, had this, you know, hubris that I could just bang this out, you know, over the summer, 2 months. I just get, you know, I got the whole idea. But like mostly it was just it took me a lot longer because once I realized how lush the idea of this world was, it took me a while of kind of exploring the world, answering a lot of questions for myself, and then, you know, to make that clear for the reader. The more I know, the more it seems real for the reader, of course. And so it took me about a year to finally get, and then the book is finished. You know, the bulk of it, you know, writing wise, is happening spring into summer of 2020. And so the pandemic is on while I'm writing this. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, even one of the blurbs on the back of the book is from the mayor of, you know, the town I live in, our wonderful mayor, Kelly Gertz, you know, mentioning, you know, we're all pickled in these moments. And this book, you know, a book about being in a dome, you know, being finished during the pandemic when we're all like, you know, locked inside, was even more kind of I don't know, like weirdly relevant and timely and zeitgeisty, even though it began a year before.
yeah,
So long answer for you, and a couple other answers along the on the way there.
yeah. You know, that the 2020 was, for many of us, myself certainly included, the worst year that we experienced. And but I would imagine there is a utility to what was happening that year if you're writing a book about the aftermath of an apocalypse.
Well, I mean, how it really worked out well was that, like, you know, as we mentioned maybe last time, but like part of the gist of this book, and you said the individual versus society is part of, you know,
Yeah,
your summation, that gets even more so. Like that's the crux of this, the Shrieking
yeah,
of Nothing. You will see
yeah,
from the very first line of this second book, it's about the individual and society. How, you know, the kind of, you know, we like to say like the concept of America is democracy versus individualism, and trying to how to balance that out. but what we were seeing, when the pandemic began was, humans, many of us being at our best and being inside to protect other people and wearing masks and doing these things. And then we saw many of us at our worst.
Yeah.
It was an example, it was a really good chance to watch people just be awful.
Yeah.
And to write a book about how, we're destroying ourselves through, capitalism and climate, and what we're doing to this planet and the climate change coming from it. And then how it would take the death of billions of people for the survivors to finally, sadly, I mean, finally, not in a good way, but like to have some form of like epigenetic traumatic imprint to like get us to not want to engage in greed and capital in any way, in any way, to continue as a society, to like be born with that, to inherit this after seeing just like the awful destruction. In this book, that's what it took, and I'm watching the pandemic, watching the response of so many of us just be so selfish, we understand that selfishness is based out of fear. It's based out of an inability to kind of come out of ourselves and meet other people as humans eye to eye. But but people were like that, and it's tough and it's understandable, but it's also difficult for a society to live like that. And so it was a book very much born, even more so out of those feelings of that time, even though the idea and concept came before that time. Yeah.
So within the context of the book, uh, the individualized religions fill a void created by solving some of these other problems that you're witnessing in real time while you're writing it, but also that you anticipated in the history that took place in this fictional world.
Yeah.
And I mentioned in the introduction that David Bowie is present on every page, even though he's not a character in the book. And religion is actually a theme that the casual observer might not realize is pervasive in Bowie's music. Heaven, hell, angels, demons, Jesus, far more, yeah, Buddha, right? Far more pervasive than space aliens.
Yeah.
So some of the phraseology of some of your sentences also reminded me of. So the chapters are named after Bowie lines from Bowie songs, but some of the phraseology of some of your sentences within those chapters also reminded me of Bowie lines. And I'll tell you what you're describing here. And I picked this up when reading it, reminded me of the line from Up the Hill Backward: the vacuum created by the arrival of freedom and the possibilities it seems to offer, which is a Bowie line that he actually borrowed from somebody else. But so I wanted to ask you about this function that religion plays in this world. Is it filling a vacuum that's created by addressing the problems that you just described, that you witnessed, that occurred historically before the events of this book?
Well, I taught religion at the University of Georgia, did my master's, taught religion for 5 years. And so I mostly taught Judaism, Christianity, Islam, an intro course. I taught another course of my own device on paganism and mythic literature. But so when I taught Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the class definition of religion I would use, and I didn't come up with this. I got this from the head of the department, who I mentored with when I first started. But so the definition I would give the students that they would have to learn, spit back on tests, was religion is seeking and responding to that which humans experience as ultimate or holy. And so don't have to have any kind of theism in there, don't have to, but this, and then another definition, one of my mentors, Dr. Carolyn Medine, she would always use the definition that religion is what orients us in space and time, and so again, you don't have to get theistic in any of that. And so for the people of this world, quite often it is a theism as like a placeholder in a way. Yeah. And that's how I often understand how kind of psychology religion goes for people, that we have this, as humans, we have these kind of basic beliefs of that we're scared to be alone. And so one of the ways to solve that as humans is to invent gods, the supernatural realities, things that you'll never be alone from, right? I mean, yeah. And then we're also, we're scared of dying. And so another thing we do is we invent the soul, an all-abiding human soul, that will continue after we die, and the idea of an afterlife. And so we create these ideas for ourselves that, that we're not alone in this world, that there are gods or a god or whatever that will, that can help you, that is there for you. Always that, and we come up with the ideas that they're perfect, that this god loves you, these gods are there for you, whatever. And then this idea that you're not gonna die, that you have a soul, there's something about you that is divine, or is all abiding, that is a capital S soul. And so we have these things we come up with because we live in the world. We know we're gonna die. Where the flesh is fragile, and we're damned. We're blessed with consciousness and self-awareness. And so so yeah, using a definition like seeking and responding, which humans experience as ultimate or holy, it's pretty easy to almost to see that almost anything could become a religion for people in that
Yeah.
kind of sense.
So
Anything could be ultimate or holy.
you said we come up with these things, and in this world is very literally the case, because
Yep.
the individuals worship their own gods, some of which were taken from fiction. There are characters that worship gods from Lovecraft stories,
Yep.
and there's a line of dialogue. I just have the quote up here. Some of these gods who have not really never really existed. So one of my questions is, did these characters actually believe that their deities exist, or are they, again mentioning Bowie, are they sort of Bowie-like, taking on characters and going through the motions, like the rituals? Do they actually think that they're communing with a deity that exists in objective reality, or is it a kind of a kabuki theater to help orient them in time and space, as you said?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, and I think we as humans are all doing a bit of both of those things. And let me be clear, like I don't, I'm an agnostic. I'm a
Yeah,
kind of deep, hardcore agnostic. I believe in mystery. Like I mean, part of my agnosticism might just be that, like, I wish I was a believer in in something. Like I very much respect beliefs. Like religions. I think all religions are kind of equally beautiful and some, equally kind of ridiculous, and that they're, but believers, people who believe in religions, that's what I care about. I care about
yeah,
humans, and I care about why people believe in things, and if these things are real to people, um, that's important, and that is real, if and so that's why in the world of this text, when you see people believing in, like, yes, a god that was like literally just made up by Lovecraft, and
yeah,
then a god that we might read about in, like, the Enuma Elish, or Gilgamesh, and we read about these a god of, of anywhere, of any time and place of the earth, that people at some point did believe was real and did worship, as far as we know, right? I mean, we don't
yeah,
entirely know the psychology of, like, of someone in the ancient world, of whether, of whether they literally believe in those gods, or whether, and whether it's euphemism coming out of that expression, but whether that they're seeing these things as models for how they understand reality. Regardless, there is a reality to them, right? I mean, there's a reality to, just to Santa Claus to some degree, if we want to get into ontology and epistemology, all that wonderful stuff. And so, and my point too with this text is that we don't want to, we don't want to, I'm not for the telling someone else that they're wrong or how they believe. I'm gonna trust you in what you believe in, and if that makes you happy and you're not hurting anyone else through it, that's wonderful, that's great. And and so, yeah, it's kind of it's about the freedom to believe, and it's about the freedom to make the choice of what you say is your ultimate reality.
yeah,
I think that's very important, and I don't mean it in kind of like a blow off way that, like, yeah, we all just believe whatever we want to believe, like, it's as for real for people as they choose for it to be. And and I think those are the kind of things that help keep us, sane, living in the world, and being humans amongst each other.
well, that's fascinating, because the oracle
Mhm.
of the name of the book,
Mhm.
who is dead throughout the entire book, so we
Yeah,
don't interact with the oracle doing their thing.
yeah.
But we learn that there is an acknowledgement between the characters
Mhm.
that there are people who went to the oracle
Mhm.
for services that
Mhm.
they may have perceived to have been supernatural.
Yeah.
But there's an acknowledgement that a lot of what the Oracle was able to observe or predict was probably based not on supernatural powers, but enhanced powers of observation, which is why it's a cyborg oracle. But just as a side observation, there were no science fiction-y enhancements that are very different than what we have today. I mean, it's almost like the cyborg had access to Google and ChatGPT.
Well, yeah, Tiresias, Pythia, the cyborg oracle, they were born blind.
I wasn't going to attempt to pronounce the name.
Okay. Yeah, Tiresias, Pythia, they were born blind, and they also, so their cyborg enhancements are about their hearing, really, and it's kind of, having been born, without sight. And so you're right. I mean, it's just a kind of a stronger, greater version of the technology we have today, due to how well that they're harnessing through the dome solar power. They've got unlimited energy in the world of this dome. And so you've got like Thinkowitz, who has his own kind of, cyborg enhancements, and that's the kind of the Google and Chat GPT. But yeah, so for for the Oracle, for Oracle of Delphi, Tiresias Pythia here, there's that those enhanced hearings, and sensitivities and observations leads to this kind of prophetic nature. And I guess you're kind of pointing at that, like we could believe it's supernatural, or we could just believe it's result of material science.
Do we as a species find magic or label something as magic, or if magic is not the right word, we label something as supernatural that we don't understand? If we don't know how the magician pulled the rabbit out of the hat, we at least entertain the possibility that it was not an illusion but actual magic.
I mean, I think we want to, like I think that's why we go to illusionists, because in those moments we're like, how did that happen? And before we get into the critical thinking, there's the moment before that where I think for many people it does feel nice to rest in the possibility that there's magic. I mean, part of my agnosticism, to rest in the possibility that there's magic, and part of my agnosticism is that to rest in that mystery is okay, that we don't necessarily understand everything about our world, and we'll understand more as science and physics progresses, but like that mystery is okay, and that I'm okay with uncertainties. I'm okay with understanding as much as we understand through science, and knowing that science is a process, and that there are things that are mysterious, and that doesn't quite fit how I understand, how I see the world doesn't quite fit any of the religions I've read about, and I've read about most of them, but I'm always open to the possibility that I'm wrong too, and I think that's an important thing. Like I'm never, like there's things that we can be certain about, but like I'd like to always leave that, the space for mystery, space for wonder, and space for and ignorance. We can't really learn anything if you don't have any ignorance.
Where does science end and magic begin?
Oh, I mean, I mean, I mean, I would just say that's just based on how much people understand of the science, right? I mean, I mean, it's we could just say magic is what science that you don't quite understand. It's there's these wonderful magicians that I watch with my kids on YouTube, Siegfried und Joy, and they do this kind of fake magic where they have like a little sheet, and the person just hides, they drop it. But like the times that the person hides really convincingly, my children are 5 and 7, they're like, that guy really did disappear. And then the person will pop up and they're like, oh, they were just behind the tree. And they're like, oh, but they really like that moment where they're like, did they really make the magic happen? Like, no, they know the person's always got to be behind the tree, and the person's behind the tree. But like, and they're smart kids. But it's it's wonderful to have that moment of like, is there real magic? Is magic real? Is that possible? Can we experience joy and wonder? That's okay.
So I'm going to shift a little bit, not that much, but there's another theme within the book that I have a feeling is going to become even more prominent in the next one, which has to do with the concept of nothing. And this is a concept that is discussed within the book. It's also, the word nothing appears in multiple Bowie songs, that he's very deliberate in using that word. The concept runs throughout this story. So sort of to open, I'll just mention two ways that it pops up in the story. there's a cult called the Abyssoids, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, the abyssoids or voidoids. Voidoids. They
Void,
don't.
okay, and they're nihilists,
Mhm,
and they believe in nothing. And at one point, some of them engage in a kind of wordplay with some of the other characters.
mhm,
Um, uh, but also, Thinkowitz, one of the lead characters, the cyborg detective,
mhm,
um, observes what isn't present,
mhm,
and the concept of what isn't there or negative presence
mhm.
is also it repeats throughout the book.
Yeah.
So let me I'm going to ask sort of an open-ended question and
Mhm,
see where you take it.
mhm.
Is nothing something?
Well, it's funny because like I hadn't even thought about it in terms of from that angle until you're bringing it up. But like, I mean, what would be the ultimate abstraction, right? I mean, if it's a book about like filling in abstract, like so nothingness is and really there is some wonderful I feel like play and in the book you're talking about and in the sequel there's even more so. But I must give the ultimate plug to really play with that discussion. Percival Everett's novel Doctor No, and I do
Yes, I've
reference
read
to
it.
Speaking of Nothing. But I mean, no one's probably thought more about nothing than than Percival Everett in that novel. So yeah, so I mean, I had to. It does get a little name check in the Shrieking of Nothing. But yeah, I mean, like that's really the ultimate abstraction, and that's why they're playing with it. That's why the abyssoids or voidoids, that you meet the nihilists, in that one scene. That's why they're playing with that concept, and they get around, as it mentions in the book, they're able to get around the kind of general prohibition to group worship because they worship nothing, right? They're not all for worshiping the same deity. They're all for worshiping nothing
Yeah,
together. And so it's like a clever like little semantic trick around this kind of rules of the world, the vibe, because they're not actually worshiping an ancient god or anything. They're worshiping nothing. And why? Because nothing lasts forever. And
yeah,
why? Because nothing's better than sex. And pretty much all the jokes I would tell when I was like a child hanging out at my like at my mom's parties of grown-ups, and I would tell them amuse people, and some of them I'm just ripping straight off of the song Nothingness by Living Color off the album
yeah,
Stain, their third album. So that was in my head while I was writing that. But my father was a linguist, so puns are part of who I am. And so I think he would pass before this book, but he would have certainly enjoyed particularly the voidoids, the abyssoids, and
yeah.
their pun-based theology, as Thinkowitz describes it.
You mentioned Percival Everett's Doctor No, which I did read, and I'm not going to let you off the hook. Now we have to describe what that book is. And I actually, believe it or not, I thought about asking him on this show, but that book has absolutely nothing to do with David Bowie, so I couldn't make a link. But
Yeah.
not that I know that he would come on, but I didn't ask. But
Mhm.
in that book, so it's called Doctor No because one of the characters sort of aspires to be a James Bond villain,
Yeah.
and I took from that nothing in that context actually is something.
Mhm.
And I also noticed on your bookshelf before we did this, so the audience didn't get to see this, but you gave me sort of a little tour of your room. I noticed Simon Critchley's On Bowie
Oh
is
yeah.
on your bookshelf, and
Mhm.
I did interview Simon Critchley about
Oh,
that book, and he discusses nothing. He and points out several of the Bowie songs um,
oh,
that um, that mention nothing. And I asked him that question: Is nothing something?
mhm.
And I don't want to characterize what he said other than no, in Bowie's use, nothing is nothing.
Mhm.
So it's, but I actually think, even in your description, you see the conundrum. Nothing is better than sex, right? And it's like, is that,
Mhm.
what does
Mhm.
nothing actually even mean?
Yeah.
Why is that concept important? It's important in this book. And again, having not read the next one, I'm guessing it's even more important in the next one. Why
Mhm.
is that something that we should be contemplating?
Well, I mean, in this one really is. It's just like that's just like in the range of me showing the kind of believers in this world, and also like as with any investigation, you mentioned that this book, you described it. It is a detective story. It is a murder mystery, and so there are a lot of red herrings, and that's usually like the thing about writing like a murder mystery is that ultimately the course of action is a person or a couple people walk around and talk to different people and ask them questions. Like that's not a compelling like trajectory of propulsion of like narrative. And so how do you spice up the formula of like literally just going and talking to different people? And so for me that device and I do think it's like a good mystery in this book, but it also is the excuse for exploring the world of this domed future Atlanta and the different parts, the different neighborhoods of the world, the different people within the world, the different ways of worshiping, the different ways of being people in this world. And so when they go to see the nihilist, they're seeing a different part of Atlanta. They're meeting different kind of characters. They're seeing kind of the different range by which people can worship. And so, meeting a couple of people who their worship is based on kind of like a weird like intellectualizing of like theology through play of language is just another aspect of the world. And so in some ways the Nothing was just for that.
Yeah.
But it gets a little more profound in the second book, because I'd read Dr. No in between the two. I had I kind of had a late dive into Percival Everett, and it was earlier in this year between what was it, between like March to May. I read 10 or 11 Percival Everett novels in like 3 months.
Really? Wow. Okay.
And it was
I
just
just read that one.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's gotten like what, over 30, and they're all wonderful and very, very different. I highly
Yeah.
recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Near the end of your book, one of the characters I'm looking at again, I pulled a quote, reflects that visiting the boundary between our world and the other world,
Hmm.
a world that might be more real
Hmm.
than that of our own, is necessary for mental health. And
Hmm.
throughout this discussion and the previous one, you've sort of alluded to this theme,
Hmm.
which I also think is a Bowie connection. It's another Bowie theme. It Bowie has been described as somebody who allows ourselves to be. I mean, you even said it, to be what we want to be.
Yeah.
So not just within the context of the book, but more broadly, do we create our own realities?
Um, I mean, I grew up with like, I mean, eventually there's a memoir coming out about this, but I grew up with a lot of woo-woo new agey stuff.
Yeah.
So in some ways I like to joke that like I majored in philosophy as an undergrad as a rebellion against, majoring in like Western philosophy as a rebellion against the kind of new age world I grew up with, from my mother and her interests and her searchings. Um, and so back then, as a teenager, I read a lot of widely, and a lot of occult and a lot of mythologies and religions. I was really into Robert Anton Wilson for a while, and so you ask a question like that, and the first thing I think of is that Robert Anton Wilson book. I don't know if it was like a screenplay called Reality is What You Can Get Away With. And so I was kind of steeped in that kind of world of and I mean, no, I mean, I believe in tangible reality,
Yeah.
and it's, the balance of my life has always been kind of, trying to balance out, belief in art and all these wonderful abstractions that I love so much, but then also in brass tacks social justice,
Yeah.
like if people are, if bellies are empty, then your theory isn't doing anything, like,
Yeah.
and so by the
Yeah.
time I'm doing a PhD in comparative literature, I've read all, semiotics, I read all, that stuff. And like when it came to theory, by the time I was doing the PhD, I was like, I'm only interested in theory that's often political or social, theory that's literature kind of based on how we can help people, like, post-colonialism is, my wheelhouse. Um, literature that's trying to act in the world, that's trying to help people, that doesn't just have to be like, ooh, political with a message, but literally is trying to, talk back against power, to, subvert meta narratives, to try to liberate people on different levels through art, is what I care about when it comes to art. And when it comes to theory, is theory that's supports that. Um, so to some extent, we're all living in our own heads and making up, how we see the world, and whether how conscious or not that is. Don't want to get too solipsistic with that, um, but and so that becomes this tough kind of push, with a text like this, that as we talked about, this book is was finished during the beginnings of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so, there's a real feeling of isolation at the same time as community, and like that weird balance of that, of like watching social media videos of people in Italy singing to each other out the windows, and like,
Yeah.
to me, one of the greatest moments during, of the awfulness of, I mean, millions of people died, like, and like worrying that like we could be one of the, like, and that how this will affect and long COVID and all that kind of stuff. But, one of the greatest moments during, the first year of the pandemic was, when Fiona Apple, dropped that new album, and literally like everyone was listening to it. Like I remember going to pick something up, for a friend of mine, who couldn't get out of the house, and like going to deliver something to her house, and I'm listening to that album on the way, and I get out of the car and I hear the album, coming out of her house
Yeah.
also. Well,
Yeah.
we're all in it together. We're sharing culture in this moment. Just felt so profound and cozy and real and human at the same time. And so, I mean, I don't know how to, much I'd get into, like how much we make our own reality. We're born into situations, and I mean, the problem with kind of I'm reluctant is a lot of that dialogue can get into like the new age world of like extreme individualism, and that's that new age pipeline towards fascism and what like
Well,
that.
sure. Actually, I was going to ask that because it's like there's, within the context of the book, on what we just talked about this, is the Oracle magical or is the Oracle very, very observant? And in one sense, I think within the context of the book, it kind of doesn't matter, and people find solace or utility in what the Oracle is providing, and choose to think of it as supernatural, or don't. It's less. I took from the book that it was less important that Apollo actually exists. There's some entity who goes by the name of Apollo who's informing the Oracle, or if it's Google glasses that are informing the Oracle.
Yeah.
Right. But on the other hand, you just mentioned it. It's we know a lot of people who chose to believe that the pandemic was not real and that the vaccine was going to kill them and that masks don't work. And many of those people died because the virus doesn't care what you believe, right? Math exists externally. And you mentioned fascism. So, I'm not going to get into your politics or my politics, but there is a thread of politics that's being debated right now in the American context, where the extent to which we can will reality into existence or out of existence is actually a subplot of the election. So where does this relativism, where is it healthy and where is it destructive?
I mean, one thing I just want to come back to is, what you brought up there is whether the Cyborg Oracle, whether they're magic or whether it's, just hyper observant. Well, the hyper observant comes from the cyborg augmentations they have, right?
Yeah.
Which is because of the technology we have in that future, right?
Yeah.
That they're able to do this because of the great amount of power that they're pulling out of the dome, because the dome itself is, is a solar, receptor, and Apollo's the god of the sun, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so like it's kind of like the amount of like like I studied a lot of Western philosophy. I wrote about Aquinas, in my senior thesis as an undergrad, and so you have that kind of the scholastic Catholic philosophers are trying to justify their belief in their God. I believe so that I can understand. They're reversing science, but in a way they're getting very science. Like the one of the justifications for the existence of God by Aquinas involves pretty much what looks like evolution. It's a very kind of evolutionary kind of theory, and so this sense of you've had people who are Christians or other religions who are really fine believing in their God that there's no evidence for, and balancing that out to science. And so even in this domed world, someone could be like, well, the sun is literally giving its power to what seems like magic powers of the Oracle. Right? I mean, it's literally from the sun, and the Cyborg Oracle worships Apollo, and that's where they get their prophecy from and tell their truth, and so it's a nice tidy narrative, even for people who living in that world. If they're real, that they're still living by a tidy narrative that has a moment of like belief in it. So I was going back to that far from the fascism. But yeah, I mean, this I mean, my politics should be pretty clear. It's an anti-capitalist novel, and I've written a second one at least also. So and I believe,
you could Google me and you could figure it out pretty quickly. But
yeah, I mean, it's you're not denying that when you got the Frederick Jameson, rest in peace, quote here. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than capital, which is a very strange thing, and it's funny too, because people are like, oh well, isn't that always existed? No. Capitalism, we've always had commerce, we've always had trade, but capitalism as a system is a relatively new thing, and then like we're living in it, and it's yeah, it's a difficult thing to see its way out of. And so that's also kind of the imaginative project of this book and its sequel for myself in creating it, and also I think for the reader, is it's a wonderful thought experiment. It's like, let's just take a break from the world we live in, and just and sadly, through the tragedy that this book gets us but to imagine a slightly better world, you know.
Yeah.
And in this book, since and I don't know if we mentioned it this recording, the last time we recorded, but you know, in this book, she's writing to the future. Our protagonist, who, you know, and staging this whole thing, like she's giving her report of this first case, the case of the Cyborg Oracle. In the second book, it's the case of, you know, of this, you know, this next, you know, crime. But so she's writing to the future after this world, you know, and she's telling them, hey, this is what we've figured out. This is how we're sorry we're not as good as we can be. Sorry we're not great. And so she's apologizing to the future,
Yeah.
like in a way. I don't know. I'm apologizing to the future through these books. I mean, one of the beautiful things about, you know, about research and writing a novel these days is that calendars, you know, there's calendar programs online that just
Yeah.
go all the way. So like I know everything, at least calendar wise, phase of the moon wise, about the year that this book is set in. And so everything calendar wise, you know, so if humans are still exist in 200 years, and you know, we still have books, people could read this book in 200 years and go, oh wait, the full moon's coming up, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like January 2220,
How
you
did
know.
he get that right?
Yeah, and then we get to August, you know,
Yeah.
2220 and the next one. And so anyone reading that will be like, oh yeah, today is that day, and like the, you know, this is the phase of the moon that's going on, you know. And
Yeah.
so um I'm writing to the future. In this, she's writing to the future. And to me, that's a pretty hopeful act. And hope is the thing that can fight fascism. And it's not the only thing. It's certainly not, you know, we don't just rest on hope and belief, but it is what we need to start from.
Yeah. So that makes me think of something that is really tangential that I'm just going to mention, and then ask like one last big question, and then I've got a couple of small questions.
Sure.
So you mentioned, and again, congratulations that you recently had a new baby.
Mhm.
And what just entered my mind is that that baby, it is possible. I'm sorry, boy or girl or
Boy, yeah.
boy,
Yep.
it is possible within his lifetime
Mhm.
that when he's very old, he could hold in his arms somebody who exists at the time that this book takes place.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's
Mhm.
not here or there. But
Well, yeah, I mean, like I'm old. I didn't have, you know, I had my first child. You know, my wife had our first child when I was 40, and yeah, so he's 5 now. By the time he's very old, he could have a grandchild who yeah, who might
yeah,
be.
I mean, to the extent that there's a meaning for me mentioning that, it's this book takes place 200 years in the future, which is not a million years in the future, right? It is like you just said, you could tell when the moon's going to come up,
Mhm.
and it is not, our connection to the future and the past. It's actually very real.
Mhm.
So, but I don't want to go down that path. Let me ask you my last sort of big question is something else that you've alluded to.
Mhm.
The world before the catastrophe
Mhm.
was dominated by capitalism,
Mhm.
where most of humanity was moving in the same direction. And from the perspective of 200 years in the future,
Mhm.
um, this capitalism was viewed as a religion that people were sort of slavishly devoted
Yep.
to their doom, right? So that slavish
Mhm.
devotion to capitalism led to the catastrophe that almost wiped out the world.
Mhm.
And it also, there's this, I think, more than a hint
Mhm.
that people in that world felt alienated,
Mhm.
whereas people in this world, where there's greater diversity,
Mhm.
they seem to feel whatever the opposite of alienation is,
Yeah.
and which is also a very Bowie-esque theme. I mean, he described the theme of his own music as alienation. I think there's a quote, I didn't write it down, but if
Mhm.
there's one unifying thread of all of my music, it's
Mhm.
alienation.
Yeah.
And what are you implying there? What's the
Mhm.
role of alienation
Mhm.
and the solution to it?
I mean, it gets so hokey and hippy
Yeah,
dippy sounding, and like, you know, I mean, I've got a black flag tattoo, and yet, you know, I'm just gonna
yeah,
come right around to, you know, like um just talking to people, you
yeah,
know. It's hard to other someone if you
yeah.
get to know them, you know, and
Well,
like
you,
it's
you
like
were
it's
describing
silly.
a
Mhm.
unifying experience during the pandemic, like when our back is up against the wall, you're
Mhm.
finding commonality with people that you might not have even noticed before.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not telling someone to like, you must go like hug your
Yeah,
oppressor right now. I mean, but of course, like that ultimately on the deepest level is what we need to do. You know, I
yeah,
mean, like, I love Brothers Karamazov, and like the full total compassion is to not just say that I, like, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for me. Like, I'm not only the victim right now, but I'm also the perpetrator. I'm a human being. I am flawed. Like, any capacity for awfulness that a human has, I have.
Yeah.
Like, any like awfulness that anyone has ever done to anyone else, I could do to somebody. I
Yeah.
don't want to. The thought of makes me, nauseated. But yeah, I am equally human. I'm equally culpable in the experience of humanity as any person in the world that we want to like brand, as awful. And so, one of the main things we have to do to fight, like fascism on just the most like basic, semantic level, basic thought level, critical thinking level, is to avoid as many like, monoliths as possible, like the government, the media, like the
Yeah.
government's made out of people, and some of them are really awful and some of
Yeah.
them are really good, and some of them are, and most of them are people who are complicated and messy, and they're, in government for different, motivations. They're getting different things out of it. And people are also persuadable, and they're like, um, we can talk to people, and like, and again, I'm not trying to sound like naive and Pollyanna here, Prince Mishkin with this, but we are all together in this, and I'm not saying that, that like, I'm not telling anyone who's ever had to turn towards violence that they're wrong in that. I'm not, going around espousing violence, but there are a lot of situations that have begun with it and sadly end with it or have to end with it, but on the most level, acknowledging each other's humanity, right? I mean,
Yeah.
alienation, is a product, we'd say, like of modernity born out of capitalism. Fascism goes even further of making people into these kind of, lone atoms, in group, out groups, othering. And the more we realize commonality, empathy, similarities between people, and kind of an excitement for difference and humanity, like the better we'll be all the time.
Yeah.
And so, this little thing to try to point out that, that there's possibilities of hope, it's the little things I can do at the same time as, if I have money, I can hopefully give it to those who need it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a hard world to fight against.
Yeah.
And but I think you're right about that kind of that vibe of Bowie, is that he's diagnosing, he's not prescribing alienation, he's
Right.
diagnosing alienation.
Yeah.
And I think what he is prescribing is what we're getting through the music, through listening to it, that interpolation, that connection that we make through the music, that we share, that like, people together all singing a song, and hearing it and feeling connection across, gender and race and geography and time. That's the stuff that I think that, he knows he's helping with through that work.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. Let me just compliment you on you've managed to get a lot of complex and deep thoughts and concepts into a pretty short, fast book. And I mentioned earlier that I was reminded of Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose,
Mhm.
which has some similarities, but one of the differences is that book, it's dense,
Hmm.
it's you have to
Yeah.
marry it for a while, and it's a
Yeah.
great marriage, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
It's a wonderful book.
Mhm.
This is a fast read, yet
Mhm.
it manages to provoke thoughts and works in concepts
Mhm.
that I don't have the skill to do that with such an economy of words. So I just wanted to compliment you and tell you that's what part of what I liked about the book.
Mhm. Well,
So
yeah, it's funny because I'm writing a book now that I'm pretty in the early stages of a novel that will be pretty big, and
yeah,
that kind of the pleasure of like long, stories, as I mentioned Dostoevsky, and I love, Melville a lot, and so I am digging into a pretty big novel. I'll even kind of, tease out the title. I don't have a publisher for it yet. I'm really kind of enjoying just, again, writing something very large and long, and story into story into story. Every character is just kind of talking to each other, telling stories, backstories on everyone, and that just kind of joy of that. And it's a novel called The Impact and the Intent.
yeah,
And so it is, so Dostoevsky and like, that Crime and Punishment and those kind of that title, but The Impact and the Intent. And in some ways it's kind of like a 1990s reckoning. It's
mhm,
based out of my friend group of the 90s that I fictionalize and just kind of follow up, the next 30 years and all these different, directions and trajectories. But that's the thing, is like with a book like this where it's, it's stylized, right? It's set in a very stylized world, and so the economy of language was about kind of the control, and making
Mhm.
sure that I did it as carefully and correctly as possible, especially with I've been an academic, I've been a journalist, and one of the things that always kind of scares me the most is like publishing something or saying something like all the things I've said tonight and in this conversation with you, and then someone coming after and being like, what about this? What about, and you're never going to get everything. There's always going to be that what about that, but
Yeah.
it's something that does haunt me because I don't want to offend anyone, don't upset anyone, but also I want to be honest and true and integritous too, without bending to the worry of an audience appeal. And so it's the economy was a way to just kind of really control and yoke. I mean, so the Shrieking of Nothing is a little bit longer, but it's just very, very similar stylistically, and it's a kind of a more of an expansion of into that world. I think she's a lot more comfortable with the character talking to the audience. I think I'm a lot more comfortable within that character writing for her and out of her, and so there's even more to the second one, but it's the same kind of writing, same style. It's still, it's not that much longer. I think you'll, kind of enjoy that in the same way. But I appreciate that sentiment. I mean, there's something. When I first started writing, I only started on short stories. I always had that mixture of kind of perfectionist versus laziness, and short stories and poems. That economy was about control. Like I can weigh out every word a lot better, and every phrasing and every punctuation, every rhythm, and as I mentioned before, I was a Joycean as a teenager, and so there's a lot of that like eye to detail and perfectionism, but then also kind of the maximalism of Joyce. And so this is a very non-maximalist novel, as you saw.
Yeah.
The one I'm working on now, the next big novel, The Impact and the Intent, is certainly maximalist, and like and there'll be a lot of weaving of stuff, but less into planning. That's the joy of that next book. I see like a basic trajectory, but it's the real joy of just like following characters, watching them talk to each other,
Yeah.
watching them tell stories, watching where those stories will lead, following those stories, enjoying just playing with language and longer big sentences, kind of a Nabokovian in the play. And so that's what I'm enjoying writing right now, and it really took finally getting this book. The second one also took a year, but we'll talk about it
Yeah.
next time. But like it took a year to write, and it was just like I almost had to birth it out of myself of like, whew, that domed baby is out there again. Now I can write so many other things and move on to so many other paths. But like I had to get the second book out. And that was kind of intense to do it. And I really look forward to hearing what you think of the second one.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you look forward to it because I want to have you back.
Yeah, I appreciate that,
So
John.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let me close this with the question I ask everybody. And it just if you've gotten to this point in this discussion, I just want to remind everyone, if they haven't read the book yet,
Mm,
that this is actually very relevant to a David Bowie show, because all the chapters are named after lines from Bowie songs, and
mm,
a lot of the concepts that Bowie addresses in his music
mm,
permeate this book. And there's a bunch of Bowie Easter eggs throughout the book.
mm,
So that I'm just saying this because the last several minutes we weren't talking about David Bowie at all. But my closing question is one that I ask everybody,
mm,
which is, what is your favorite Bowie song and
mm,
album? And
mm,
you already said what your favorite Bowie song is. So um, yes, answer that question. But maybe
mm,
what are your top two favorite Bowie songs, and what's your favorite
mm.
Bowie album?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite Bowie song is Ashes to Ashes. Album wise, I mean, it's so funny because I've loved Bowie for so long that I get, so many different phases, and also like, like I mean, I would have to say like Hunky Dory is probably
Yeah,
my favorite Bowie album. It's
yeah,
probably one of my top three favorite albums ever. And like, I often feel trite to say it, but like, because Changes is on it, but like Beulah Brothers is
yeah,
is gorgeous. Quicksand, I mean, is like Andy Warhol, Queen. I mean, like, it's just it's so yeah. I mean, like, as a teenager, Ziggy Stardust was the album for me. I covered that song in bands more than any other song I've ever played live or even like alone. Like I really love the Berlin trilogy a lot.
yeah,
Those three, and what's so nice about these books and those three is that like you have that really kind of like the dour kind of autistic feel of like the second half of Low, but really kind of all of Low in a way. And then most of Heroes is in that. And so Heroes, you really feel a lot of, Sons of Silence, you feel Metropolis, you feel a lot of
yeah,
Berlin as it's meant to be, but Berlin in the 20s, Berlin in the teens, modernist Berlin, and it's kind of romanticized, big R even romanticized modernist Berlin. But like, what's amazing is Lodger, because then Lodger really brings in so much of the flavor for these books, because like Yassassin is one
Yeah.
of my Bowie songs. It's in my top five,
Yeah.
Yassassin, and that is like it's referenced in here. There's a reference to Yassassin, and like Night Flight Africa, like so much of like the richness of like the world cultures and world music and gender and all that play of Lodger. And so
Yeah.
to see like the Berlin trilogy, those three together, really sums up like kind of my thoughts of these books. But then otherwise, like Outside is an album I
Yeah.
really love. One
Yeah.
Outside. It's him writing a also weird detective
Yeah.
novel. Bowie. And there's a big vibe of
There's a
that.
little Nathan Adler in your story, a little
Yeah,
bit. Yeah.
yeah. And it's hard not to think of his son's movie Mute, with some of that. I really like Duncan Jones's work. And then you've got but Black Star. I mean, Black Star
Yeah.
is just gorgeous. And like I even like again The Next Day. I mean, it's weird that like the next day is some really stuff I enjoy on it. But um but Black Star, I mean, like
Yeah.
it's so gorgeous. It's so perfect. And like it's one of those things that like genre doesn't necessarily, matter, but like to try to think of like what genre we would call the album Black Star, and I'm like
Yeah.
hard jazz,
Yeah.
like hardcore jazz, like how would you describe most of the songs on that album? They're just like they're so wonderfully just that. So yeah, so like I would say Ashes to Ashes, Life on Mars, Warsaw,
Yeah.
um, and Heroes, Sons of the Silent Age. I mean, I love Let's Dance. Even
Yeah.
like I'm pretty devout.
We're allowed to like that song.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I like that
Yeah.
album, and like Carlos Alomar told me some wonderful, tales of about being on that tour. So you mentioned Critchley before, which is nice though. So people want to check out. I wrote an essay about Bowie, published at The Believer online, the year after he died, so on the anniversary of his death, and I cite I mentioned like three of my favorite books about Bowie at that point in my life, and so Steve Erickson's novel These Dreams of You, highly recommend for all Bowie lovers. Um, then there's Simon Critchley's Bowie book is in there, and then also I put in Wickline's 33 and a third on Low, which was really great. Glenn Hendler hadn't put out his Diamond Dogs 33 and a third, which I also really love. But so Wickline's Low, and so that essay, I talk about like what Bowie means to me in it, and I do towards the end even quote Rock and Roll Suicide at the end.
Yeah.
That direct call he's making to all of us. You're not alone. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing that he's doing to connect with the audience. And so I mentioned the Critchley in there, and Critchley's just a brilliant philosopher. Also,
Yeah.
it's good to
Yeah.
live time as that guy.
I'll you check out my interview with him. It's on
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
on YouTube.
I'm
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I haven't listened to that yet, but I'm excited to hear that. Yeah.
It was actually that we've approached the end of this, but I'll just tell you this. Uh, he was my first video interview,
Oh, cool.
which it was done at his suggestion. He suggested video. My previous interviews were all written,
Mm-hmm.
and so this interview that we're doing today owes a debt of gratitude to Simon Critchley. So
Yeah,
anyway,
look,
this is
the only Facebook friends you and I shared are just the Bowie people. So it's
yes.
like Simon Critchley, Glenn Hendler. I'm trying to think of who else. But do you know Lance Olson? Do you know the
I
writer Lance?
do. In fact, I have 2 interviews with Lance Olson. Yeah,
Wonderful.
check
Yeah,
those
yeah.
out too.
Yeah, his Bowie book. I was sending him some of my Bowie essays, and he sent me his Bowie book before it came out. And
Yeah,
really wonderful work. He's a brilliant writer, Lance Olson.
yeah, it's terrific. It's that was a fascinating discussion too. But the book was really wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully you can interview Steve Erickson. If you haven't read These Dreams of You, I highly recommend that.
I haven't, so I just wrote that down while you were speaking. If you
Oh,
you
so
saw me looking at something else, I was writing it down. I have not read that one yet.
yeah,
So
so good.
anyway, Jordan, thank you very much. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for giving me so much time. More importantly, thank you for the book. The book is The Death of the Cyborg Oracle, which anybody watching this could get right away. And the upcoming book is The Shrieking of Nothing, which, depending on when you see this, might already be out. It is not yet, but
October 22nd.
October 22nd. Wonderful.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to getting it and reading it and having you back. So
Fun.
thank you very much. This has really been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, John. I look forward to talking to you again. I appreciate your thoughts and time.
Great. Thank you.